24 years before the calamity, two paths crossed, and not by accident. One was that of a god who was certain that his fate had become a destiny. The other was of a man whose destiny became his fate. The god was Marduk. The man was Abraham. The place where their paths crossed was Haran. And an outcome of that was to last to our very own times, when Babylon, now Iraq, rained deathly missiles on the land of Jerusalem, now Israel. That Abraham had sojourned in Haran is known from the Bible. That Marduk had wanderings in faraway lands, and that he ended up in the land of the Hittites, we know from his autobiography. That the specific place where he had spent 24 years was Haran is surmised by us from the very opening words of Marduk's autobiography. He begins his query, until when, by addressing it to Elu Haranim, the gods of Haran, as the immediately present gods, and only then goes on to the distant great gods who judge. Indeed, to be in Haran was a logical choice, for it was a major urban and religious center, lying at the crossroads of trade routes and a hub of communications at the border of Sumer and Akkad, but not yet within Sumer proper. Haran was a perfect headquarters for the god whose son was raising an invasion army. A sojourn of 24 years before the invasion and the nuclear holocaust that occurred in 2024 BC means that Marduk arrived in Haran in 2048 BC, that, by our calculations based on a careful synchronization of biblical, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian data, was on the very footsteps of Abram or Abraham. He was born, by our calculations, in 2123 BC. Every move of Terah and his family, we have shown in the Wars of Gods and Men, was linked to the fast-developing events in Ur and the Sumerian Empire. The Bible informs us that Abram or Abraham left Haran on God's instructions at age 75. The year then was 2048 BC, the very year in which Marduk had arrived in Haran. And it was then that Yahweh, not just the Lord God, said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and out of thy birthplace, and from thy father's dwelling place unto the land which I will show thee. It was a triple departure from Abram's country, Sumer, and from his birthplace, Nippur, and from his father's dwelling place, Haran. And it was to a new and unfamiliar destination, for Yahweh had to show it to Abram. Taking his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot with him, Abram went to the land of Canaan, arriving from the north, crossing over perhaps where his grandson Jacob would later cross. He moved fast southward, reaching a place called Elon Moreh, a name literally meaning the oak tree which points, apparently a well-known landmark that a traveler could not miss. To be certain that he was traveling correctly, Abram awaited further instructions, and Yahweh appeared there unto Abram, confirming that he was in the right place. Moving on, Abram reached Bethel, God's abode, and again called out the name of Yahweh, continuing thereafter without stopping to the Negev, the dryness, the southernmost part of Canaan bordering on the Sinai Peninsula. He did not linger there long. Food was short there, so Abram moved on, all the way to Egypt. It is customary to depict Abraham as a nomadic Bedouin chieftain, spending his days tending his flocks or lolling in his tent. In fact, he had to be much more than that, for otherwise, why was he chosen by Yahweh to be sent on the divinely ordained mission? He was descended from a line of priests, and the names of his and his brothers' wives, Sarai, princess, and Milcah, queenly, indicate a connection with Sumer's royal line. No sooner did Abram reach the Egyptian border than he coached his wife on how to behave when they would be received at the Pharaoh's court, and later on, back in Canaan, he dealt with its kings as an equal. After a sojourn of 5 years in Egypt, when Abram was ordered back to the Negev, he was provided by the Pharaoh with a great number of men and women to be in his service, and with flocks of sheep and herds of oxen and she-asses and he-asses, as well as with a flock of highly prized camels. The inclusion of camels is significant, for they were suited for military purposes in desert conditions. That a military conflict was brewing, we learn in the chapter immediately following in Genesis chapter 14, dealing with the invasion of southern Canaan by a coalition of kings of the east, from Sumer and its protectorates, such as Elam, in the Zagros Mountains, which was renowned for its fighting men. Capturing city after city as they followed the king's highway, they detoured around the Dead Sea and headed straight for the Sinai Peninsula. But there Abram and his armed men blocked the invaders' way. Disappointed, the invaders satisfied themselves by looting the 5 cities. That included Sodom and Gomorrah, in the fertile plain south of the Dead Sea. Among the prisoners they took was Lot, Abram's nephew. When word reached Abram that his nephew had been taken captive, he pursued the invaders with 318 select men, all the way to Damascus. Since some time had passed until a refugee from Sodom told Abram about his nephew's capture, it was quite a feat for Abram to catch up with the invaders, who were already at Dan, in the north of Canaan. It is our suggestion that the trained young men, as they are called in Genesis, were camel-riding cavalrymen from a Mesopotamian sculpture. It was after those events, the Bible states, Genesis chapter 15, that Yahweh spoke to Abram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abram, I am thy shielder. Thy reward shall be exceedingly great." It is time to review the Abram saga up to this point, and to ask some questions. Why was Abram told to forsake everything and go to a completely strange place? What was special about Canaan? Why the rush to reach the Negev on the border of the Sinai Peninsula? Why the royal reception in Egypt and the return with an army and a camel cavalry? What was the target of the invaders from the east? And why was their defeat at the hands of Abram deserving a promise of a great reward from God? Far from the customary picture painted of Abram as a nomadic sheep-herder, he turns out to be a superb military leader and a major actor on the international scene. It can all be explained, we suggest, only if one accepts the reality of the Anunnaki presence and takes into consideration the other major events occurring at the same time. The only prize worth an international war, at the very time that Nabu was organizing fighters in the lands west of the Euphrates, was the spaceport in the Sinai. It was that which Abram, allied with the Hittites and trained by them in martial arts, was hurriedly sent to protect. It was to that purpose that an Egyptian pharaoh in Memphis, himself facing an invasion by followers of Ra or Marduk, based in Thebes in the south, provided Abram with a camel-riding cavalry and a large number of other men and women servants. And it was because Abram successfully protected the gateway to the spaceport that Yahweh assured him of a great reward, as well as promised him protection from future retribution by the losing side. The War of the Kings took place, by our calculations, in 2041 BC. The year after that, the princes of the south captured Memphis in Egypt and dethroned Abram's ally, declaring allegiance to Amun-Ra, the hidden or unseen Ra or Marduk, who was then still in exile. After Marduk's rise to supremacy, the new rulers of Egypt began building in Karnak, a suburb of the capital Thebes, Egypt's greatest temple in honor of Amun-Ra. They lined the majestic avenue leading to it with ram-headed sphinxes, honoring the god whose age, the age of the ram, had arrived. Things were no less hectic in Sumer and its empire. Celestial omens, including a total lunar eclipse in 2031 BC, predicted coming doom. Under the pressure of Nabu's warriors, the last kings of Sumer drew back their forces, and protective outposts ever closer to the capital Ur. There was little comfort to be found in appeals to the gods, for the gods themselves were engulfed in the sharpening confrontation with Marduk. Gods as well as men looked to the heavens for signs. A human, even one as qualified or chosen as Abram, could no longer protect the essential facility of the Anunnaki, the spaceport. And so, in 2024 BC, with the consent of the Council of the Great Gods, Nergal and Ninurta used nuclear weapons to keep the prize from Marduk. It is all described vividly and in detail in the Era Epos. It is there also that a sideshow, the upheaval of the sinning cities that included Sodom and Gomorrah, is recounted. Abram was forewarned about what was to happen. At his request, 2 angels of the Lord went to Sodom the day before the nuking of the spaceport and the cities to save Lot and his family. Asking for time to gather his family, Lot prevailed on the 2 divine beings to postpone the upheaval until he and his family could reach a safe haven in the mountains. The event was thus not a natural calamity. It was predictable and postponable, and in the morning Abraham got up early and went to the place where he had stood before Yahweh the day before. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and he beheld and saw a smoky steam rising from the earth, as the steamy smoke of a furnace. On God's orders, Abraham moved away from the place, getting closer to the seashore. In the mountains in southeastern Jordan, Lot and his daughters huddled in fear. Their mother, having lingered behind as they were escaping from Sodom, was vaporized by the nuclear explosion. The usual translation of the words that she was turned into a pillar of salt stems from a misreading of the Sumerian word that could mean both salt and vapor. Convinced that they had just witnessed the end of the world, the 2 daughters of Lot decided that the only way to enable the human race to survive was to have them sleep with their own father. Each one had a son that way. They were, according to the Bible, the progenitors of 2 tribes east of the Jordan River, the Moabites and the Ammonites. And as for Abraham, God remembered Sarah, as he had promised, when he appeared to them with the 2 angels the year before. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, and they named the son Isaac. Abraham was 100 years old at the time. Sarah was 90. With the spaceport gone, Abraham's mission had come to an end. Now it was up to God to keep his end of the bargain. He had cut a covenant with Abraham to give him and his descendants as an everlasting legacy the lands between the brook of Egypt and the Euphrates River. And now, through Isaac, the promise had to be kept. And there was also the question of what to do with the other space facilities. There were, to be sure, 2 such facilities in addition to the spaceport itself. One was the landing place to which Gilgamesh had set his course. The other was the Mission Control Center, no longer needed but still intact. A post-diluvial navel of the Earth, serving the same function as the pre-diluvial navel of the Earth that Nippur had been. To understand the similar functions and consequently similar layouts, one should compare our sketches of the pre- and post-diluvial space facilities. Before the deluge, Nippur designated the navel of the Earth because it was at the center of concentric circles delineating the landing corridor, served as Mission Control Center. Cities of the gods whose names meant seeing the red light, Larsa, seeing the halo at 6, Lagash, and seeing the bright halo, Larak, marked out both the equidistant spacing and the landing path towards Sipar, Bird City, the site of the spaceport. The landing path within an elongated landing corridor was based at its point on the twin peaks of Mount Ararat, the most prominent topographic feature in the Near East. Where that line intersected the precise line northward, the spaceport was to be built. Thus the landing path formed a precise 45-degree angle with the geographic parallel. After the deluge, when humanity was granted the 3 regions, the Anunnaki retained for themselves the 4th region, the Sinai Peninsula. There, in the central plain, the ground was both flat and hard, perfect tank terrain, as modern armies have concluded, unlike the mud-buried and water-clogged post-diluvial plain in Mesopotamia. Choosing again the twin peaks of Ararat as the anchor point, the Anunnaki drew a landing path at the same 45-degree angle to the geographic parallel, the 30th parallel north. There, in the central plain of the Sinai Peninsula, where the diagonal line intersected the 30th parallel, was to be the spaceport. To complete the layout, 2 more components were required: to establish a new mission control center and to delineate and anchor the landing corridor. We believe that the outlining of the landing corridor preceded the choosing of the site for Mission Control Center. The reason? The existence of the landing place in the Cedar Mountains in Lebanon. Every folklore, every legend connected with the place repeats the same assertion, that the place existed before the flood. As soon as the Anunnaki landed back on Earth after the deluge on the peaks of Ararat, they had at their disposal a real, functioning landing place, not a full-fledged spaceport, but a place to land on. All the Sumerian texts dealing with the grant to mankind of domesticated, i.e. genetically altered plants and animals, describe a biogenetic laboratory in the Cedar Mountains, with Enlil now cooperating with Enki to restore life on Earth. All the modern scientific evidence corroborates that it was from that particular area that wheat and barley and the first domesticated animals had come. Here again, modern advances in genetics join the parade of corroborations. A study published in the journal Science as recently as November 1997 pinpoints the place where wild einkorn wheat was genetically manipulated to create the founder crop of 8 different cereals, some 11,000 years ago, in that particular corner of the Near East. There was every reason to include this place, a vast stone platform of massive construction, in the new space facilities. That in turn determined by equidistant concentric circles the location of Mission Control Center. To complete the space facilities, it was necessary to anchor the landing corridor. In its southeastern end, 2 nearby peaks, one of which remained hollowed to this day, as the so-called Mount Moses, were handy. In the equidistant northwestern edge, there were no peaks, just a flat plateau. The Anunnaki, not any mortal pharaoh, built there 2 artificial mountains, the 2 great pyramids of Giza. The smaller 3rd pyramid, we have suggested in the Stairway to Heaven, was built first as a test scale model. The layout was completed with a mythological animal carved from the native rock, the Sphinx. It gazes precisely along the 30th parallel, eastward toward the spaceport in the Sinai. These were the components of the post-diluvial spaceport of the Anunnaki in the Sinai Peninsula, as built by them circa 10,500 BC. And when the landing and takeoff place in the Sinai's central plain was blown up, the spaceport's auxiliary components remained standing: the Giza pyramids and Sphinx, the landing place in the Cedar Mountains, and Mission Control Center. The landing place, as we know from the Adventures of Gilgamesh, was there circa 2900 BC. Gilgamesh witnessed there, the night before he had attempted entry, a rocket ship rising. The place remained extant after the deluge. A Phoenician coin depicted vividly what had stood atop the stone platform. The vast stone platform still exists. The place is called Baalbek, for it was the secret place of the north, of the Canaanite god Baal. The Bible knew the place as Beth Shemesh, house or abode of Shamash, the sun god, and it was within the domains of King Solomon. The Greeks, after Alexander, called the place Heliopolis, meaning city of Helios, the sun god, and built there temples to Zeus, his sister Aphrodite, and his son Hermes. The Romans after them erected temples to Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury. The temple to Jupiter was the largest temple ever built by the Romans anywhere in the empire, for they believed that the place was the most important oracle place in the world, one that would foretell the fate of Rome and its empire. The remains of the Roman temple still stand atop the vast stone platform. So does, undisturbed by the passage of time and the ravages of nature and men, the platform itself. Its flat top rests on layer upon layer, courses, of large stone blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons. Of great renown from antiquity is the Trilithon, a group of 3 colossal stone blocks lying side by side, and forming a middle course where the platform had sustained its greatest load impact. Each of these colossal megaliths weighs about 1,100 tons. It is a weight that no modern piece of equipment can even come close to lifting and moving. But who could have done that in antiquity? The local legend says the giants. They not only placed those stone blocks where they are, they also quarried and shaped and carried them over a distance of almost a mile. That is certain, for the quarry has been found. There, one of the colossal stone blocks protrudes from the mountainside, half quarried. A man sitting on it looks like a fly on a block of ice. Down at the southern end of the landing corridor, the Giza pyramids still stand, defying all traditional explanations, challenging Egyptologists to accept that they had been built millennia before the pharaohs, and not by any one of them. The Sphinx still gazes precisely eastward along the 30th parallel, keeping to itself its secrets, perhaps even the secrets of the Book of Thoth. And what about Mission Control Center? That, too, exists. It is a place called Jerusalem. And there, too, a great and sacred platform rests atop colossal stone blocks that no man or ancient machine could have moved, raised, and put in place. The biblical record of Abraham's comings and goings in Canaan includes 2 instances of seemingly unnecessary digression. In both instances, the place digressed to what was the site of the future Jerusalem. The first time, the digression is reported as an epilogue to the story of the War of the Kings. Having caught up with and defeated the invaders all the way north near Damascus, Abraham returned to Canaan with the captives and the booty. And the king of Sodom went forth toward him, after he was returning from smiting Chedorlaomer, and the kings who were with him, to the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's valley, and Melchizedek, the king of Shalem, and he was a priest unto the God Most High, brought forth bread and wine, and he blessed him, saying, Blessed be Abram unto God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be the God Most High, who hath delivered thy enemies unto thy hands. Melchizedek, whose name has meant in Hebrew exactly what the Akkadian Sharukin, righteous king, has meant, offered Abram to keep 1/10 of all of the booty that he had retrieved. The king of Sodom was more generous. Keep all the wealth, he said, just return to me the captives. But Abram would have none of that, swearing by Yahweh, the God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. He said he would not keep even a shoelace. Genesis chapter 14. Scholars have long debated, and will undoubtedly continue to debate, whether Abraham swore by the God Most High of Melchizedek, or meant to say, No, Yahweh is the God Most High by whom I will swear. This is the first time that an allusion is made in the Bible to Jerusalem, here called Shalem. That this was a reference to what was later known as Jerusalem is based not only on long-standing traditions, but also on the clear identification in Psalm number 76, verse 3. It is generally accepted that the full name, Yerushalem in Hebrew, meant the city of Shalem, Shalem being a deity's name. Some suggest, however, that the name could also mean founded by Shalem, and it could also be argued that the word Shalem was not a name or even a noun, but an adjective, meaning complete, without defect. That would make the place's name mean the perfect place. Or if Shalem be a deity's name, it could mean the place of the one who is perfect. Whether honoring a god, established by a god, or the perfect place, Shalem or Jerusalem, was located in the most unlikely place as far as cities of man were concerned. It was located amidst barren mountains, neither at any trade or military crossroads, nor near any food or water sources. Indeed, it was a place almost completely bereft of water, and the proper supply of drinking water was constantly to be a principal problem and vulnerability of Jerusalem. Shalem or Jerusalem featured neither in Abraham's migrations nor in the route of the invasion from the east, nor in his pursuit of the invaders. Why then a detour for a victory celebration? A detour, one is inclined to say, to a God-forsaken place, except that the place was definitely not God-forsaken. It was a place, the only place in Canaan, where a priest serving the God Most High was located. And the question is, why there? What was special about the place? The second seemingly unnecessary digression had to do with the testing by God of Abraham's devotion. Abram had already carried out his mission to Canaan. God had already promised him that his reward would be great, that God himself should protect him. The miracle of a son and legal heir at extreme old age had happened. Abram's name was changed to Abraham, father of a multitude of nations. The land was promised to him and his descendants. The promise was incorporated in a covenant that involved a magical ritual. Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed, and all was ready to let Abraham and his son enjoy the peace and quiet to which they were surely entitled. Then, all of a sudden, it was after all those things, the Bible says, Genesis chapter 22, that God tested Abraham, telling him to go to a certain place and there sacrifice his own beloved son. Take now thou thy son Isaac, the only one whom thou lovest, and get thee unto the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a sacrifice on one of the mounts, which I shall point out to thee. Why God decided to test Abraham in that excruciating way, the Bible does not explain. Abraham, ready to carry out the divine order, found out in the nick of time that it was only a test of his devotion. An angel of the Lord pointed out to him a ram caught in the bushes, and told him that it was the ram that was to be sacrificed, not Isaac. But why was the test, if it was needed at all, not conducted just where Abraham and Isaac dwelt, near Beersheba? Why the need to undertake a journey of 3 days? Why go to the part of Canaan that God identified as the land of Moriah, and there to locate a specific mount, which God himself pointed out, to conduct there the test? As in the first instance, there had to be something special about the chosen place. We read, Genesis chapter 22, verse 4, that on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from a distance. The area was rich, if with anything, with barren mounts. From nearby, and certainly from a distance, they all look alike. Yet Abraham recognized the particular mount from a distance. There had to be something there that distinguished it from all the other mounts. So much so that when the ordeal was over, he gave the place a long-remembered name, the mount where Yahweh is seen. As 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1 makes clear, Mount Moriah was the Jerusalem peak on which the temple was eventually built. From the time Jerusalem became a city, it encompassed 3 mounts, listed from the northeast to the southwest. They have been Mount Zophim, Mount of Observers, now called Mount Scopus in English, Mount Moriah, Mount of Directing, of Pointing Out, in the center, and Mount Zion, Mount of the Signal. These are designations of functions that bring to mind the function names of the beacon cities of the Anunnaki, marking out Nippur and the landing path when the spaceport had been in Mesopotamia. Jewish legends relate that Abraham recognized Mount Moriah from a distance because he saw upon it a pillar of fire reaching from the earth to heaven, and a heavy cloud in which the glory of God was visible. This language is almost identical to the biblical description of the presence of the Lord upon Mount Sinai during the Exodus. But putting such lore aside, what we believe Abraham saw that identified the mount as different, that distinguished it from all others there, was the great platform upon it. A platform which, though smaller than at Baalbek's landing place, was also part of the space facilities of the Anunnaki. For Jerusalem, before it became Jerusalem, we suggest, was the post-diluvial mission control center. And as at Baalbek, that platform, too, still exists. The reason for the first and purpose of the second, digressions, thus comes into focus. The fulfillment of his mission was marked by a formal celebration, including a priestly blessing of Abraham with the ceremonial bread and wine, at a site, the only site in Canaan, directly connected to the presence of the Elohim. The second diversion was meant to test Abraham's qualifications for a chosen status after the destruction of the spaceport and the resulting dismantling of accoutrements of Mission Control Center, and to renew there the covenant in the presence of Abraham's successor, Isaac. Such a renewal of the divine vow indeed followed right away after the test. And the angel of Yahweh called out to Abraham for a second time from the skies, saying, "This is Yahweh's word, this is my oath, because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, the unique one, I will greatly bless thee, and I will exceedingly multiply thy seed, and in thy seed shall the nations of the earth be blessed." By renewing the divine vow at this particular site, the site itself, hallowed ground ever since, became part and parcel of the heritage of Abraham the Hebrew and his descendants. The divine promise to Abraham, he had already been told by God, was to come true only after a passage of time and a servitude in a foreign land for 400 years. All told, it was 1,000 years later when the descendants of Abraham took possession of the sacred mount, Mount Moriah. When the Israelites arrived in Canaan after the Exodus, they found that a tribe of Jebusites had settled south of the sacred mount, and let them be, for the time to take possession of that most hallowed ground had not yet come. The singular prize went to King David, who circa 1000 BC, 1,000 years after the testing of Abraham, captured the Jebusite settlement and moved the capital from Hebron to what has been called in the Bible the City of David. It is important to realize that the Jebusite settlement that David captured and his new capital were not at all Jerusalem, as it is now envisioned, not even the walled old city. The area captured by David and thereafter known as the City of David was on Mount Zion, not Mount Moriah. Even when David's successor Solomon extended the city northward to a section called Ophel, it still stopped short of encroaching on the unique area to the north. It indicates, we suggest, that the sacred platform extending from there northward on Mount Moriah already existed at the time of David and Solomon. The Jebusite settlement was thus not on Mount Moriah and its platform, but well to its south. Human dwellings near, but not within, a sacred precinct were common in Mesopotamian cult centers, such as at Ur, or even in Enlil's Nippur, as evidenced by an actual map of Nippur discovered drawn on a clay tablet. One of David's first actions was to transfer the Ark of the Covenant from its latest temporary location to the capital, in preparation for placing it in a proper house of Yahweh, which David planned to erect. But that honor, he was told by the prophet Nathan, was not to be his, on account of all the blood that his hands had shed during the national wars and his personal conflicts. The honor, he was told, would go to his son, Solomon. All he was allowed to do in the meantime was to erect an altar. The precise place for it was shown to David by an angel of Yahweh, standing between heaven and earth, pointing out the place with a drawn sword. He was also shown a tavnit, a scale model of the future temple, and given detailed architectural instructions, which, when the time came, he handed over to Solomon in a public ceremony, saying, "All of this, in writing by his hand, did Yahweh make me understand. All of the workings of the tavnit." The extent of those detailed specifications for the temple and its various sections and the ritual utensils can be judged from 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 11 through 19. In the 4th year of his reign, 480 years after the start of the Exodus, the Bible states Solomon began the construction of the temple on Mount Moriah, as had been shown to his father David. While timbers cut from the cedars of Lebanon and the purest gold of Ophir were imported, and copper for the specified wash basins was mined and smelted in the famed King Solomon's mines, the structure itself had to be erected with hewn and cut stones, large and costly stones. The stone ashlars had to be prepared and cut to size and shape elsewhere, for the construction was subject to a strict prohibition against the use of any iron tools for the temple. The stone blocks had to be transported, brought over to the site for assembly only. And the house, when it was in building, was built of stone made ready before it was brought thither, so that there was neither hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was in building. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 7. It took 7 years to complete the building of the temple and to equip it with all the ritual utensils. Then, on the next new year in the 7th month celebration, the king and the priests and all the people witnessed the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant to its permanent place, in the temple's Holy of Holies. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed therein, at Mount Sinai. No sooner was the ark in place under the winged cherubim than a cloud filled the house of Yahweh, forcing the priests to rush out. Then Solomon, standing at the altar that was in the courtyard, prayed to God, who in heaven dwells, to come and reside in his house. It was later at night that Yahweh appeared to Solomon in a dream and promised him a divine presence. My eyes and my heart will be in it forever. The temple was divided into 3 parts, entered through a large gateway flanked by 2 specially designed pillars. The front part was called Ulam, hallway. The largest middle part was the Ikal, a Hebrew term stemming from the Sumerian Igal, great abode. Screened off from that was the innermost part, the Holy of Holies. It was called the Devir, literally, the speaker, for it held the Ark of the Covenant with the 2 cherubim upon it, from between which God had spoken to Moses during the Exodus. The great altar and the wash basins were in the courtyard, not inside the temple. Biblical data and references, age-old traditions, and archaeological evidence have left no doubt that the temple that Solomon built, the first temple, stood upon the great stone platform that still crowns Mount Moriah, also known as the Holy Mount, Mount of the Lord, or the Temple Mount. Given the dimensions of the temple and the size of the platform, there is general agreement where the temple stood, and that the Ark of the Covenant within the Holy of Holies was emplaced upon a rock outcropping, a sacred rock, which, according to unwavering traditions, was the rock upon which Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac. The rock has been called in Jewish scriptures Even Shetiyah, foundation stone, for it was from that stone that the whole world was woven. The prophet Ezekiel, chapter 38, verse 12, identified it as the navel of the earth. The tradition was so entrenched that Christian artists in the Middle Ages depicted the place as the navel of the earth, and continued to do so even after the discovery of America. The temple that Solomon built, the first temple, was destroyed by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar in 576 BC, and was rebuilt by Jewish exiles returning from Babylon 70 years later. That rebuilt temple, known as the Second Temple, was later substantially enhanced and aggrandized by the Judean king Herod during his reign from 36 to 4 BC. But the Second Temple, in all its phases, adhered to the original layout, location, and the situating of the Holy of Holies upon the sacred rock. And when the Muslims captured Jerusalem in the 7th century AD, they claimed that it was from that sacred rock that Muhammad ascended heavenward for a nighttime visit, and they enshrined the place by building the Dome of the Rock to shelter and magnify it. Geologically, the rock is an outcropping of the underlying natural rock, protruding above the level of the stone platform some 5 or 6 feet. The face is not even, but it is a most unusual outcropping in more than one way. Its visible face has been cut and shaped, with an impressive degree of precision, to form rectangular, elongated, horizontal, and vertical receptacles and niches of varying depths and sizes. These artificial niches and receptacles had to have had some purpose known to whoever had made those incisions in the rock. What has been only surmised since long ago, e.g. Hugo Gressmann, Altorientalisch Bilder zum Alten Testament, has been confirmed by recent researchers, such as Lean Rittmeyer, locating the original Temple Mount. The Ark of the Covenant in the walls of the Holy of Holies had been emplaced where the long straight cut and other niches in the face of the rock were made. The implication of those findings is that the cuts and niches in the face of the rock date back at least to the time of the first temple. There is, however, no mention whatsoever in the relevant passages in the Bible of any such cutting by Solomon. Indeed, it would have been impossible because of the strict prohibition against the use of metal axes and other tools on the mount. The enigma of the sacred rock and what had stood on top of it is magnified by the mystery of what might have stood under it, for the rock is not a simple outcropping, it is hollow. In fact, given permission, one can descend a flight of stairs built by the Muslim authorities and end up in a cave-like cavern, the rocky roof of which is the protruding upper part of the sacred rock. This cavern, whether natural or not, is uncertain, also features deep niches and receptacles, both in the rocky walls and, as could be seen before the floor was covered with prayer rugs, also in the floor. At one place there is what looks like an opening into a dark tunnel, but what it is and where it leads is a well-kept Muslim secret. 19th century travelers have stated that this cavern is not the last subsurface cavity associated with the sacred rock. They stated that there is yet another, lower cavity beneath it. Israeli researchers, fanatically barred from the area, have determined with the aid of soil-penetrating radar and sonar technology that there is indeed another major cavity under the sacred rock. These mysterious cavities have given rise to speculation not only regarding possible temple treasures or temple records that might have been hidden there when the first temple and then the second temple were about to be overrun and destroyed. There is even speculation that the Ark of the Covenant, which the Bible ceased to mention after the Egyptian pharaoh Sheshach ransacked, but did not destroy the temple circa 950 BC, might have been hidden there. That, for the time being, must remain just speculation. What is certain, though, is that the biblical prophets and the psalmist referred to this sacred rock when they had used the term Rock of Israel as a euphemism for Yahweh, and the prophet Isaiah, chapter 30, verse 29, speaking of the future time of universal redemption on the day of the Lord, prophesied that the nations of the earth shall come to Jerusalem to praise the Lord on the mount of Yahweh, at the Rock of Israel. The Temple Mount is covered by a horizontal stone platform, slightly off-perfect, rectangular in shape, because of the contours of the terrain, whose size is about 1,600 by 900 feet, for a total stone-paved area of close to 1,500,000 square feet. Although it is believed that the present-day platform includes sections at the extreme south and possibly also in the north that had been added between the first temple's building and the destruction of the second temple, it is certain that the bulk of the platform is original. It is certainly so regarding the slightly raised portion, where the sacred rock, and thus the dome of the rock, are located. As the visible sides of the platform's retaining walls show, and as more recent excavations have revealed, the natural bedrock of Mount Moriah slopes considerably from north to south, though no one can say with any certainty what the size of the platform had been in the time of Solomon, nor estimate precisely the depth of the slopes that had to be filled. An arbitrary assumption of a platform measuring only 1 million square feet and an average depth of 60 feet, much less in the north, much more in the south. The result is a landfill requiring 60 million cubic feet of aggregate, soil, field stones. This is a very major construction undertaking, yet nowhere in the Bible is there even a mention or a hint of such an undertaking. The instructions for the first temple cover pages upon pages in the Bible. Every small detail is given, measurements are precise to an amazing degree, where this or that utensil or artifact should be is prescribed, how long the poles that carry the ark is specified, and so on and on. But it all applies to the house of Yahweh. Not a word about the platform on which it was to stand. And that could only mean that the platform has already been there. There was no need to construct it. Standing out in complete contrast to that absence of mention are the repeated references in 2 Samuel and 1 Kings to the Milo, literally the filling, a project begun by David and enlarged by Solomon to fill up part of the slopes on the southeastern corner of the sacred platform so as to enable the city of David to expand northward, closer to the ancient platform. Clearly, the two kings were quite proud of that achievement and made sure it was recorded in the royal chronicles. Recent excavations in that area indicate, however, that what was done was to raise the sloping level by constructing a series of terraces that grew smaller as they rose. That was much easier than first surrounding the expanded area with high retaining walls and filling up the gap with aggregate. This contrast undoubtedly corroborates the conclusion that neither David nor Solomon built the vast platform on Mount Moriah, with the immense retaining walls and enormous amount of landfill required. All the evidence suggests that the platform already existed when the construction of a temple was even contemplated. Who then built the platform, with all the earthworks and stonework that it entailed? Our answer, of course, is the same master builders who had built the platform at Baalbek, and for that matter the vast and precisely positioned platform on which the Great Pyramid of Giza stands. The great platform that covers the Temple Mount is surrounded by walls that serve both as retaining walls and as fortifications. The Bible reports that Solomon built such walls, as did Judean kings after him. Visible sections of the walls, especially on the southern and eastern sides, display constructions from various later periods. Invariably the lower, and thus more ancient, courses are built of larger and better-shaped stone blocks. Of these walls, only the western wall, by tradition and as confirmed by archaeology, has remained hollowed as an actual remnant from the time of the First Temple, at least in its lowest courses, where ashlars, perfectly cut and shaped stone blocks, are the largest. For almost 2 millennia, since the destruction of the Second Temple, Jews held on to this remnant, worshipping there, praying to God, seeking personal succor by inserting slips of paper with a request to God between the ashlars, bewailing the temple's destruction and the Jewish people's dispersion, so much so that in time the Crusaders and other conquerors of Jerusalem nicknamed the Western Wall the Wailing Wall. Until the reunification of Jerusalem by Israel in 1967, the Western Wall was no more than a sliver of a wall, about 100 feet or so squeezed between residential houses. In front was left a narrow space for the prayers, and on both sides rising house atop house. It encroached on the Holy Mount. When the houses were removed, a large plaza was formed in front of the Western Wall, and its extension all the way to its southern corner was unveiled. And for the first time in almost 2 millennia, it was realized that the retaining walls extend downward nearly as much as they had been exposed above what has been considered ground level. As suggested by the hitherto visible portion of the Wailing Wall, the lower courses were larger, better shaped, and of course much older. Beckoning with mystery and with a promise of ancient secrets was the extension of the Western Wall to the north. There, Captain Charles Wilson explored in the 1860s an archway, which still bears his name, that led northward to a tunnel-like passage and westward to a series of arched chambers and vaults. The removal of the encroaching dwellings revealed that the current street level lay atop several lower, now subterranean levels of ancient structures that included more passages and archways. How far down, and how far north did all that extend? That was a puzzle that Israeli archaeologists finally began to tackle. In the end, what they discovered was mind-boggling. Using data from the Bible, from the book of Maccabees, and from the writings of the Jewish-Roman historian Josephus, and taking into account even a medieval legend that King David knew of a way to ascend the mount from the west, Israeli archaeologists concluded that Wilson's Arch was the entranceway to what must have been in earlier times an open-air street that ran along the western wall, and that the wall itself extended northward by hundreds of feet. The laborious clearing of the rubble, confirming those assumptions, led to the opening in 1996 of the archaeological tunnel, an event that made headlines for more than one reason. Extending for about 1,600 feet from its start at Wilson's Arch to its exit on Via Dolorosa, where Jesus walked carrying the cross, the Western Wall tunnel uncovered and passes through remains of streets, water tunnels, water pools, archways, structures, and marketplaces from Byzantine, Roman, Herodian, Hasmonean, and biblical times. The thrilling and eerie experience of walking through the tunnel, deep below ground level, is akin to being transported in a time machine, backward into the past with every step. All along the visitor can see and touch the actual parts of the western retaining wall from the earliest times. Courses that have been hidden for millennia have been exposed. In the northernmost section of the tunnel, the natural bedrock that slopes upward comes into view. But the greatest surprise, for the visitor as well as for the archaeologists, lies in the more southerly section of the uncovered wall. There, at the ancient street level, but not yet the lowest bottom course, there had been emplaced massive stone blocks, and on top of them 4 colossal blocks each, weighing hundreds of tons. In that portion of the western wall, a 120-foot section is made up of stone blocks that are an extraordinary 11 feet high, about double even the unusually large blocks that form the course below. Only 4 stone blocks make up the section. One of them is a colossal 42 feet long, another is 40 feet long, and a third over 25 feet long. Soil-penetrating radar and other soundings have indicated that the depths of these stones is 14 feet. The largest of the 3 is thus a stone mass of about 6,500 cubic feet, weighing 1,200,000 pounds, which is about 600 tons. The somewhat smaller one weighs about 570 tons, and the third one about 355 tons. These are colossal sizes and weights by any yardstick. The blocks used in the construction of the Great Pyramid in Giza average 2.5 tons each, with the largest weighing about 15 tons. Indeed, the only comparison that comes to mind are the 3 trilithons in the great stone platform of Baalbek, that also form a course above somewhat smaller but still colossal stone blocks. Who could have emplaced such colossal stone blocks? And what for? Because the stone blocks are indented at their margins, archaeologists assume that they are from the time of the Second Temple, or more specifically, the Herodian period, 1st century BC. But even those who hold that the original stone platform was smaller than the present one agree that the central portion that encompasses the sacred stone, and to which the massive retaining wall belongs, had existed from the time of the First Temple. At that time, the prohibition against using iron tools, that dates back to the time of Joshua, was strictly enforced. All the stone blocks used by Solomon, without exception, were quarried, cut, shaped, and prepared elsewhere, to be brought to the site only for assembly. That this was the case regarding the colossal stone blocks under discussion is additionally clear from the fact that they are not part of the native rock. They lie well above it, and have a somewhat different hue. In fact, the latest discoveries west of Jerusalem suggest that they might have come from a quarry there. How they were transported and raised to the required level and then pushed into the necessary emplacement remain questions that archaeologists are unable to resolve. An answer, however, to the question, what for, has been offered. The site's chief archaeologist, Dan Bahat, writing in Biblical Archaeology Review, stated, "We believe that on the other eastern face of the western wall at this point, under the Temple Mount, is an enormous hall. Our theory is that the master course, as this section had come to be called, was installed to support and serve as a counterforce to the vault inside. The section with the enormous stone blocks lies only slightly to the south of the location of the sacred stone. To suggest, as we do, that this massive section was needed for heavy impacts associated with the site's function as a mission control center with its equipment installed on and within the sacred rock, seems to be the only plausible explanation after all.